1980s, when in the 1980s when intergovernmental panel started talking about, the rising temperatures of the globe would create a bigger problem for the human civilization. Keeping this thing in the mind, today's topic is going to discuss about overall perspective of rising temperatures of the globe, changing patterns of the weather, then rising sea level, loss of biodiversity, how all the problems would affect the general human on the earth. See, as a student of the global politics, we will have to also discuss about how the different countries of the global community thinking about this issue, and how the global communities have been negotiating, renegotiating, and taking different stand on the issue of the changing global climate. Equally, we will also discuss about the scientific predictions and the questions raised by the different state on these predictions. Like, for the example, when the 1980s, when the intergovernmental panel for the climatic change talked about, the changing global patterns of the temperatures would become a very dangerous for the human civilizations. So, the way we are urbanizing ourselves, the way we are industrializing ourselves, the way we are emitting the carbon dioxide, and the way we are hampering the carbon cycles, it would create a bigger problem for the earth. Then the country like the USA, who are one of the most dominating country of the world and taking every time a very playing a very important role in deciding what kind of decisions global community would take, they started questioning it. And in the 1997, when the Kyoto Protocol was signed by the number of countries, even the US president also signed and ratified it, the Senate didn't give the approval, and later in 2001, the George W. Bush II told the media that we are not going to ratify the Kyoto Protocol. And then when in the 2012, when there was a Rio 20 summit was held in the Rio de Janeiro, again the US raised the issues. As long as the global community would not resolve this problem of rising temperature or rising sea level of the society, as long as the largest country of the world like the China and India would not become a partner of this treaty. So, what we have been witnessing for the last 30 and 40 years, time to time, at the global level, whenever the initiatives have been taken by the global community or by the United Nations Environmental Programme or by the United Nations General Assembly, what we witnessed that every time one country or another country raise the issues of their own concern. For the example, in the recent past, what we witnessed that where every global community are concerned about the rising temperatures of the globe from the last 30 to 40 years or from the last 60 years, Russia on the other side took a different kind of a stand. They said, if the temperature would rise of the globe, it would help more to their countries. It would give more time for their agriculture cultivations. At the same time, it would also extend its agriculture land. So, there are different kind of understanding what we have been seeing in the last 30 to 40 years. On the same time, when the issue of China participations in the stopping of the carbon emissions, China started telling to the world community, this is our time to catch up with the world community. This is our time to catch up with the world economy. So, why we would stop when this is time for us to become a developed country in the world map. So, these are the issues which have been generally creating some kind of concerns among the global community to how we can resolve the problem of the climate change across the world. And see, now the scientific community, whether those who are supporting and those who are not supporting, those who are talking about it would be a natural phenomena, everyone is agreed that yes, the temperature of the globe is rising, and if the temperature of the globe would rise, it would create a lot of problem for the human civilizations, either it will be the melting of the ice cap, or whether it will be the loss of the biodiversity, whether it will be a threat to the health of the aging populations, or it would be some kind of inundated place for the number of countries, especially the AOC countries. So, these concerns generally global communities are raising these times. So, in the first slides, what we are discussing about it, you see how we will start understanding about the climate change. Here the first slide talking about the climate change refers to alterations in the Earth's climate system that may occur due to increased concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. The change in the climate are caused primarily by the emissions of fossil fuel like carbon dioxide, methane and nitrous oxide, hydrofluorocarbons, perfluorocarbons, sulfur hexafluoride and other gases. The combined emission of these gases disrupts the Earth's natural carbon cycle. Now, what we understood through this slide, let us see, they are telling the climate change refer to alterations of the Earth climate systems, and how the alteration of the Earth climate systems has been happening in the last 60 years or from last 100 years. Here they are talking about, there are certain gases that is known as the greenhouse gases. Their emissions created a problem in the global atmosphere, and they are telling, this is the human centric activities that have been creating a bigger problem for the rising temperature of the globe or the climatic change in the global system or in the atmosphere. So, they are talking about, if we have to understand about what is the climate change, then we have to understand about alterations in the Earth climate, and then they said the emissions of the carbon dioxide like carbon emissions from of the greenhouse gases and related to the other gases. And they said, how we will have to curb it. There they say, when there is a lot of emissions of the carbon dioxide and these gases, it would somewhere alter the global climate system. Why it alter the global climate systems? Because there is a disruption in the natural carbon cycles. So, it is some kind of scientific understanding where they are talking about, there are three things one has to understand why the global climate change has been occurring in the world system. They are taking lot emissions of the carbon dioxide, nitro oxide and other gases that known as a greenhouse gases. Their emissions create lot of problem, and their emissions somewhere create a problem in the stratosphere area that is above the 12 kilometer of the Earth, and there we are finding the sun directly affecting the whole the Earth system. And they are talking about, another reason they are talking about, there is a somewhere hindrance in the natural carbon cycle, and due to this the atmosphere of the globe has been changing, and if we will have to preserve and if we will have to maintain the ecological balance, then we have to think about how to maintain and how to reduce these gases. This is the basic concerns global community also thinking about it, how we will have to reduce the emissions of the carbon dioxide, how we will have to reduce the usage of the fossil fuels, and how we will have to reverse back the situations of the global climatic change where the natural carbon cycle process would take in a place as it naturally taking place in the earlier. So, these are the issues which are very much concerning to the global community. Then what we witness that in the next slide, a first step towards a worldwide climate change regime modeled on the Vienna Conventions Montreal Protocol regime was taken at the United Nations Conference for Economic Development in Rio de Janeiro in 1992. All the participant 176 nations signed the UN Framework Conventions on climate change. a binding treaty that recognizes the problem and call the precautionary measures to anticipate, prevent or minimize the causes of climate change and mitigations of its adverse effect. Now, see, what we witnessed that the global communities are more concerned about how to reverse this greenhouse gases effect and make a globe where the natural cycle of the carbon would take place. And here from the 1980s, what we witnessed that the first time in the Vienna conventions, the global community started thinking seriously about how to reverse this cycle of natural carbon process. And then the Montreal Protocol, what we see in the 1987, where the global community started thinking more seriously. Then what we witnessed that in the 1988 Intergovernmental Panel for the Climatic Change has been established. So since that, what we have witnessed that a number of conferences held across the world community, and we started discussing, deliberating, debating about how we can minimize the cause of climate change and mitigations of its adverse effect. And since that, we are started discussing about all these issues. And in 1992, when the Rio de Janeiro, almost 176 countries signed on this agreement how we can reverse this trend. And since that, what we have been witnessing, the United Nations Framework of Convention for the Climate Change has been signed, and each and every year almost member countries set together and they decide how we can control and contain this carbon emissions. And last treaty in the 2018 was held in the Poland. So before that, what we witnessed that the treaty was held in the Morocco. Then before that, the treaty was held in the France, where our Prime Minister Narendra Modi was also participated in it. So what we are witnessing from all these facts, let me say from 1980 onwards, a global community have been shown more and more concerns about the changing climate of the earth and how we can reverse it, the trends. So the global community of the human civilizations would make a natural balance with the ecology, and that is the basic concerns of the global community and the global politics. Then in this slide, what we try to understand the historical overview of this climate change and of climate change politics. Here, what we witnessed that in the first point, the global warming emerged as a significant global political issue in 1988. In September 1988, the issue first reached the UN General Assembly, with Malta proposing that climate become part of the common heritage of mankind. By December of that year, the General Assembly had passed a resolution endorsing the establishment of the IPCC and urging that the issue become a priority one, but withdrawing from the common heritage concept towards an assertion that climate change was merely a common concern of the humanity. See, through these 2 points, what we understand, you see, the Malta conventions already this is there is second time where, of the World Climatic Conventions were held in the Malta, and there all the small island countries who are going to face a major threat of the changing climatic patterns of the globe, and they started emphasizing on the UNEGA, especially the UN General Assembly, that see the global community must consider this changing pattern of the global climate, the changing pattern of the temperature of the globe would be a common heritage of the things, because see, if this trend would continue, if the sea would be rise more and more, if the temperature would rise and more, if the ice cap would started melting, it would not affect 1 and 2 countries, it would affect more than 50 and 100 countries of the world. So if we have to preserve this earth, we will have to think like that, how to preserve this human civilization. And so they said to preserving this earth is basically a common heritage things. So they requested that, because it's very important for all of us to think in the larger perspective and declare this climatic patterns as a common heritage rather than in other aspect like another environmental security issues. But the United Nations General Assembly accepted the proposal of the Malta, and they said, see, we are very much agreed with that. This is the very serious problems, and we are equally concerned about it. But our concern is more keeping this thing in the mind. See, rather declaring it as a common heritage, we consider it is a common problem of the humanity. So, in the United Nations General Assembly, they declared this changing patterns of the climate or the rising temperature of the globe. They said it's the common concern of the humanity, and how we can reduce the emissions of the greenhouse gases, that would be the major concerns for the global community, and we all would work to prevent this kind of emissions of the gases, and we will create awareness among the society, we will create awareness among the state, we will create awareness at the global level and global platform, where we can pursue at the same time. We will also make a give the guideline to the global community to how to preserve our earth from this unbalanced emissions of the gases. So, from 1988, what we have witnessed, that a global community started thinking more seriously about this rising temperature, and there what we witnessed, a demand was for the common heritage, but the United Nations General Assembly accepted as a common concerns of the humanity. Then in the next slide, what we are witnessing, the George Bush, the president of the USA that time, made global warming an issue in the US presidential election of 1988. Those who think we are powerless to do anything about the greenhouse effect are forgetting about the White House effect, was his famous line on this issue. Then the many world leaders made a statement on the need for a response to global warming. This continued through late 1990s and provided a great deal of the pressure and momentum which led to the formal negotiation which started in 1991. Now, it is the political part of the global climatic change, and here what we understood, that the US, one of the dominating power of the world politics, when there was a US presidential election was held in the 1988, the senior George Bush started making this kind of assertion, because see, the Hamburg conference was held in the 1988, then the World Meteorological Department and the United Nations Economic Development Program jointly set up intergovernmental panel for climatic change things, and then what we witnessed from the 70s, MIT research reports and eco-radicals, they all have started raising this kind of alarming statement. Then the scientists, NASA scientists also started claiming that, see, we have to stop waffling lot and take a certain kind of decisive decisions. So, it was one of the common concern in the US general elections also. And that time, the one of the most prominent candidate who later became a president of the US also, he said openly to the world community, see, you should not bother about the greenhouse effect. You don't know the power and the technological might of the USA, because if you have seen the power of the greenhouse effect, but you haven't seen the power of the White House effect. So, when he made this kind of a statement, he tried to say us, you see, don't bother about these things. We know this is the concern, this is the concerns for the global community. Everyone knowing that. We also know the USA is one of the largest producers of the greenhouse gases. Then USA is also one of the largest emitter of the greenhouse gases. We are also going to contain it, but at the same time we want to tell to the world community, you should not bother about it. We have this kind of technological might, we have this kind of scientific knowledge where we can easily contain these global problems. So, the US president said the day he will come to the office, in the first year he will call a conference, and then he will call the conference of all the global community, and how we can contain this greenhouse gases, that would be the major concerns for the global community. So, what we witnessed that after 1988, what we witnessed that when the George Bush became president, a series of global conferences held in the Toronto and then the Montreal Protocol, then finally in the 1991 when the United Nations started calling the Earth First Summit, and in 1992 what we witnessed that more than 176 countries signed on this treaty to how to we will preserve the climate of the world and how we will save our biodiversity, and then they also agreed on to set up a United Nations framework convention for the climate change. So a series of conferences held at the international level, and and also when the US started making this kind of a statement, especially the US President started making this kind of statement, then it also shown the shift for, that the environment politics became a global concern, and it came to the high politics, because earlier, prior to the 1980s, what we have witnessed, it was a secondary issues for the global community, and the national security and other issues was more prominent. But after 80s, what we witnessed that environmental concern, environmental security became a high politics area of the global community, and the global community started thinking about it. Then the Hamburg to Male, because why the Hamburg to Male? Here what we try to learn it, in November 1988, a World Congress on Climate and Development was held in Hamburg. This called for a carbon dioxide emission to be reduced by 30% by the year 2000 and 50% by 2015. It argued for unilateral actions from the industrialized nations to start the process of change, a global ban on the productions and the use of CFC, covered by the Montreal Protocol by 1995, and urgent strategies for reversing deforestation and beginning afforestation program. Now, see, what I have said you, in the 1998, a World Climatic Conference was held in the Hamburg, and here the global community and the representatives of the globe, they said, see, we should not think about what the other nations are doing, or what the thinking of the developing nation. Now, instead of those countries who are emitting a lot of greenhouse gases, they should take an initiative. Like if you take the data, then 40% emitted by the USA, then 40% by the European countries, rest of the emissions by the Japan and the other developed countries. So in this World Climatic Conference, the global community asked to this industrialized countries, see, you should take an initiative, you should take a lead and try to contain the usage of the greenhouse gases. And here the trans-national social movement also played a very important role when in the USA, when the dew point where the 25% production of the greenhouse gases was made by this dew point plant. Here the trans-national social movement activists, the Greenpeace, went there and they demonstrated against it, and they raised the banners of the revolt, and they started creating awareness among the society, and you see how it would damage the earth, how it would damage the climate, and there it draw the attentions of the world community. So through the Hamburg conference, what we witnessed that, you see, a unilateral decisions, unilateral initiatives being taken by the industrialized countries to how to contain it, and there also we witnessed that different kind of politics we saw it, because see, when the US and the Scandinavian countries started thinking about how to reduce the greenhouse gas effects, then the European countries started giving alternatives, and they said, no, there is no need to use the cap. Then when the US and the Switzerland started pursuing the European countries, then the Germany was in the side of the USA, but the Great Britain, France and Italy was not in favoring of reducing the greenhouse gases, because they considered it would hurt their economy. However, later on they started giving alternative kind of thing, the cap and trade policy, and they started talking about we should give the permissions to the concerned countries how much they can emit the carbon dioxide, and if they would go above the absorption capacity of the atmosphere, then they would have to pay for it. So these kind of alternatives started coming. But anyhow, the global community started thinking about how to reduce the CFC, and now after 2015, what we witnessed that the global community have been reached on certain kind of conclusions to reduce the greenhouse gas affected greenhouse gases, and by 2030. Then In the also in November 1989, representative from some of the small island state, especially the Kiribati, the Maldives, Malta, Mauritius, and Trinidad and Tobago, met in Malaysia in the Maldives to discuss global warming from their perspective. This produced the Malé Declarations and later led to the establishment of the alliances of small island states, AOCs, in the Second World Climate Conference. What we witnessed that, see, this also becomes so important, prominent for the 36 countries of the world, those who are the coastal countries. They call the conference and they establish association that call the alliances of the small island states, and they came together and they forced to the United Nations Assembly to urgently think about to how to preserve this global temperatures and how to contain this global temperature issues, because if the sea level would rise, then it would become very difficult for them to survive. And the way the scientists are predicting, they are started thinking about kisi, if the global community would not cooperate, then in 2050 the area of the almost 36 countries would be not a place where the human civilization would flourish. So they started talking about kisi, it is an issue for the global community and we should all think together rather than to think in the isolation. Then the Rio 22, the Paris Agreement, we will discuss after the break of these issues.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so very much for giving us this session. Friends, you are requested to be with us as there is a lot more for you in store. So we are back after a short break. Thank you. Hello friends, welcome back to this session. Friends, as you know that today we are talking on global climate change, and for the discussion on the topic, we have with us in our studios Dr. Sujit Thakur. Dr. Sujit Thakur is a renowned professor, and through him we always get in-depth knowledge on various topics. Friends, if you wish to ask questions from Dr. Sujit Thakur, then do call us through our toll-free number. Our number is 1-800-110-430. I repeat, our number is 1-800-110-430. You are requested to call in the last 10 minutes. Now, I would like to welcome our guest, Dr. Thakur, once again. Hello, sir. Welcome back to the session.
Once again, prior to the break, what we have been discussing about, you see, from the Hamburg to the Malta to the Toronto to the Rio de Janeiro to the Montreal to the Kyoto Protocol, and this all the treaty initiated by the United Nations Environmental Program. What we have witnessed that there are certain kind of problems between the global community to come together, and certain times within the European partners, then within the industrial country, then between the developed and developing countries. But after 2012, what we witnessed that this issue once became a very prominent before the global community, and from 2012 to 2015, the two treaties, especially the Rio 20 and the Paris Agreement, where the global community somewhere reached on the consensus to how to reduce the carbon emissions by the 2030, and there they all agreed, whether it's China, whether it's India, whether it's America, whether it's European countries, and they all agreed that it's the common problems and we will have to protect the environment, and it is very important for all of us. So what we see in the Rio 20s in 2012, given the widespread acknowledgement of the global warming and emphasis on increasing need for climate governance. So two things what we witness. One is the climate governance, and another one is the global warming. Both the issues have got the prominence. Then what we see, the Rio 20 failed to achieve any political commitment, garner much support establishment of WTO. However, the two things what we understood, see, though there is a not a common consensus emerged on the commitment of the how to reduce it, but everyone started thinking about, see, there is a time to establish a world environment organization kind of thing. Then the US also want to see India and China limits its emissions. Then the Paris Climate Accord or Paris Climate Agreement is an agreement within the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, dealing with the greenhouse gas emissions, mitigations, adoptions and finance setting in the year 2020. What we have witnessed that in the Rio 12, the US has a certain problem. It's asked for that the China and India would also become a partner of this containment of the greenhouse gases, and most of the world community also thought about there is a need of the climate governance kind of things. Then also they thought about like the WTO, there is a requirement of World Environment Organizations. But anyhow, what we have witnessed that both the party, whether it's developing and developed countries, there are some kind of political gap in understanding. But in 2015 in the Paris Accord, what we have seen is by 2020, both the developing and developed countries agreed to reach on how to contain the greenhouse gases, especially their mitigation, adaptations and finance. And so they also are talking about the green fund, how and technological transfer and all these things, and they have reached on certain kind of solutions of these problems. So these initiatives have anyhow helped all of us to understand these problems, and the global community yet still believing that the United Nations Environmental Program would able to sort out the problem through different kind of negotiations with their conferences. Then in the scientific, what we witnessed that, you see, in the 2001 when the George Bush Jr. Said, so no, we are not going to sign on the Kyoto Protocol. He raised the questionability of the science of the rising temperatures of the globe. And here there are two theoreticians, it's very important, who have just contradicting each other's views. One is Hansen's and another is Dyson. The NASA scientist James Hansen's statement to the US Congress that it is time to stop waffling so much. When he said, the NASA scientist James Hansen, what he tried to say in the 80s, you see, when he started speaking before the US Congress, he said, you see, this is the time to take initiatives. We have already taken a lot of time where we are very much indecisive. So now if we cannot control and contain ourselves, if we cannot regulate this greenhouse gas effect, then it would become a very dangerous for the world civilizations. And the number of other scientists started telling him the alarmist, but the Hansen's effect would be a larger. And what we witnessed that the Hamburg conference to the Malta, to Rio de Janeiro, the Kyoto Protocol, all would happen after when the NASA scientists started talking about, see, this is the time to take a decision. Then the deniers like the Freeman Dyson countered the argument of James Hansen in his book Weapon and Hope and called him alarmist. He said the fuss about global warming is exaggerated and it is more of politics than scientific based predictions. He suggested that in a natural cycle of 1 lakh years, the ice age prevails for 90,000 years, followed by warm interglacial period of 10,000 years. The present period of warming began 12,000 years ago. Therefore, the onset of the next ice age may be overdue. The harshest frost in the 50 years in the Russia in March 2013. Now see, the Dysons try to tell us, you see, what the Hansen's trying to tell us, you see, if we cannot take decisions and if you cannot stop the emissions of the greenhouse gases, then the Greenland, Antarctica, Arctic, all the ice cap would melt and more than 36 countries would wiped out from the world map, and there would be a threat to the food security, there would be a threat to the safe drinking water, there would be a threat to the proper habitat for the human civilizations. He said it is completely unscientific, and he himself told him that maybe our view is unorthodoxical, but he said it, see, this ice is take 1 lakh years, and here the 90,000 years it would be like a ice age, and in the 10,000 years they would try to melt, and again they try to rebuild itself. So they said ki whatever we have been witnessing in the last 200 and 300 and 400 years, and from last 100 years, it is a process, it's a natural process. It's a warming began in 2000 years ago. So they try to tell us, see, this ice age would again form, and whatever we have been witnessing, it would again through the natural process, it would be again come to the same patterns. So one should not become a panic, and one should think like that. See, this is the natural cycle, and the scientists who are talking about, see, the Arctic, Antarctica and the Greenland all would melt if the global temperature would rise to 2 degrees Celsius up by 2100, and the global community would face a bigger problem. That is not the reality. And he cited the example of the two examples. He said, see, in the 2013 in the Russia, the last 50 years, what we have seen it, the harshest coldest climate we witnessed. Then there was a Gulf Stream in the 2005 onwards in the European nations, where there was a lot of cold wind. So he said, see, this changing patterns indicate that, you see, now this ice age would take a natural place in their own geological cycle. So one should not bother about it. So even within the scientific community, what we witnessed, that one is talking about, you see, this is the time to take a decision, another is talking about, this is the natural process, one should not be alarmist. And taking this clue, time to time, the global community and the global states also taking a different positions. Like in 2001, the George Bush said, see, the science is questionable. Then now the Russia is talking about, see, it would help to our countries, and it would give the more proper climatic weather for the more agriculture productions, and it would, if there would be a more warm weather, then it would give the more time for the cultivations and the crop productions. So why we should bother about it, and why we should contain the greenhouse effects? Then the China is talking about, you see, this is the time to catch up, our economy is growing. So the industrialized countries talking about to stop the greenhouse emissions. So but whatever the problem, right now we are facing these problems given by the developed countries. So they should take initiative rather than we should take initiative. So these are the statement when the global community started thinking, giving. Then this kind of scientific support, they started arguing in their own favor, and raising the issues, raising the statement of sometime Hansons, and sometime those who favors there should be no emissions, there should be no containment of the greenhouse gases. They started talking about the Dyson. So these are also problems scientifically what we witnessing whenever the global community go to agreed on certain kind of issues. Then the most important part is the impact of the climate change, and here what we are witnessing, there are number of impact being already given by the IPCC, and they said, see, number one is the ocean and sea level rise, alterations of ocean circulations, patterns and loss of sea ice cover, widespread change in coastal and maritime ecosystem. Third, they say the weather intensity, a more vigorous hydrological cycle. Means the first one what we have witnessing, the ocean and sea level rise. Second one what we see, the alteration of ocean circulations. Third one what we see, the coastal and maritime ecosystem problem. Then the third one what we see, intensity, a more vigorous hydrological cycle. And next slide talking about the public health impact, means the global health impact. Then the threat in agriculture and food security, change in water resources, and biological diversity losses. So in the 1988 itself, the Intergovernmental Panel for the Climatic Change said that these are the following issues where if we cannot control and contain our climate patterns and the rising temperatures of the globe, we would have to face all these problems. And one by one we are going to discuss all these issues. Here in this map what we are witnessing, that you see, these are the countries, if the global temperatures would rise, there is a anticipations that these countries would wipe out from the world map, like the Cyprus, Bahamas, Cuba, Belize, Jamaica, St. Kitts, Antigua and Barbuda, Dominican Republic, Trinidad and Tobago, then the Southeast Asian Pacific and other countries like Singapore, Fiji, Malta, Tango, Papua New Guinea, Bermuda, and other more countries, like almost 36 countries. They are so they have formed the alliances for the small Iceland countries, and they started pressurizing and forcing the global community to think about common heritage rather than think about it's only the concerns of the humanity. And they said, see, if the present patterns of the consumption, if the present patterns of the industrialization, if the present patterns of the rising of the sea would continue, then it would be very difficult for us to survive. So it's very important for all of us to think about how to preserve the present earth, so everyone would be flourished, rather than for the some people it would be fruitful, and for the other it will be devastating. Then so this map, what we try to understand the rise of the sea level, how it would affect to all of us. See, here the scientists trying to tell us if the sea level rise 3 feet or 1 meter, what would be the consequences. They said, see, the 10% of the productions of the rice reduced. Then they say 85% of the world rice productions take place in the Southeast and East Asia, endangering the food supply of 200 million people and create 50 million environmental refugees. What they try to say us, if you have gone through in the just last week, then another scientific report has come to say, if this pattern of the global temperatures would continue, because the Southeast Asia is considered the basket of the rice productions, and here what we are witnessing, they are telling to see they are producing the 85% of the rice of the world consumptions. And if this present trend would continue, then productions would decrease to almost minimum 10%. And this last week the scientists report have come, if this present global warming would continue, then whatever the nutrient value of this rice for the human health, that would also reduce, and it would create a more and more problem for the human health. Then they are telling to see if the rise sea would be above than 3 feet, then right now there are 10 million climatic refugees, but if it would continue, then in 2025 it would increase to the 40 million, and after 2050 almost more than 200 million climate refugees would be across the world, and it would create a very great threat for the state security and the security and the socio-economic structures of the society. So they are talking about, see, it's not a issue which we can ignore. This is the issue. It is as important as the issue of state sovereignty and national security. So if we cannot contain, if we cannot reduce, if you cannot reverse these changing patterns of the global climate change, we would have to face a bigger problem in the future. Then they try to give through this slide, what we try to understand, what kind of problem we are going to face it, like the rise of sea level and the climate refugee. The first point is the climate refugee are people displaced by environment change, such as rising sea level, drought, and increase in hurricanes, floods, and other environmental disasters. There are already tens of millions of climate refugees around the world, and by 2050 this number could increase to 150 to 200 millions. One particularly vulnerable area is Maldives. 4 lakh populations approximately, a nation of 1200 islands. 200 islands are inhabited in the Indian Ocean. Maldives' highest point of elevation is a mere 2.3 meters, 7.5 feet above sea level. Another is Cook Island. The US state of Louisiana loses 65 square kilometer or 25 square miles to rising sea level every year. Now, through this slide, what we try to understand, because see, if the rising sea level would continue, what the scientists are trying to predict it, what would be the biggest problem for the world community? There is a rapid rise in the climatic refugee. One side there is a rapid rise in the population, another side there is a rapid rise of the climatic refugee. Then what we are witnessing, there is a lack of food across the state. Then third, what we are witnessing, the country like the Maldives, an example, in the Cook Island in the Myanmar, it would be wiped out from the global map, and many more countries. So they are telling us, see, if we cannot reverse it back, we will have to think that, you see, after 2025, after just 7 to 8 years, you would have started facing this kind of problems. And they said, you see, they have given a present example of the Louisiana, and they said, you see, due to this rising temperatures, US is one of the most technologically advanced countries, and what the George Bush said in the 1988, you see, the world has not seen the effect of the White House, world has seen the effect of the greenhouse, but they are unable to contain and reduce the losing land from their own territory, and the Lusitania are losing 65 square kilometers each year, and it is displacing the people of that state. Then there is a though there is a very small population called the Kibilana in the state of Alaska, and there is a 200 indigenous peoples are residing in that state, but the World Bank has predicted that by 2025 this city would be not in the world map because it would be submerged in the rise of the sea level. So there are number more and more examples, like the next they say, if all the ice on Greenland alone were to melt, global sea level would rise to 23 feet. Another 70-foot rise would be associated with the similar disintegrations in Antarctica. Could you imagine the way the Hansel is predicting, see, if the present temperatures would be continued, then it would be very difficult for the global community to and for the coastal civilization to exist. And they are telling, see, if only the three ice cap, what we see, the ice mountain like the Greenland, Antarctica and Arctica, if all three would melt, then the situation would be very devastating. But they are citing the example, if only the Greenland would start melting, then the sea level rise would be more than 23 feet, and number of more than 34 countries would wiped out from the world map. So they are telling us, see, it's a very bigger problem, and so the world community think about it. Then they say such rise would be global catastrophe, leading to the end of life on many islands and in coastal civilizations throughout the world. As the whole of climate is warming by the indeterminate amount, however, certain geological areas such as Western Europe may experience colder temperatures because change in ocean current. What we have said, there are changing patterns of this. Then the next slide, what we are witnessing, the US, the NASA, the National Atmospheric and Space Administrations, which tracks sea level rise all over the world, says that the sea has risen for the last 50 years at a rate of 0.7 of an inch each year, and the rise has accelerated to an annual rate of 0.12% of the past dozen years. Small islands and low-level coastal areas are particularly vulnerable to climate change. Many low-lying areas such as parts of Maldives, Egypt and Bangladesh would be inundated and made uninhabited by a 50 centimeter 20-inch sea level rise. Now see, this is the very threatening, or you can say the very concerning for all the human civilizations. You see the way the sea has been rising in the last 60 years, the way the scientist has proven that. You see, from the last 60 years, what we have witnessed, that each and every year there is increase of the 0.7 inch of the rise of the sea level, and they are telling is from the last 12 years it has been rising at the rate of 0.12 annually, and this was reported in the 1996, and now it's almost 20 years have been over, and they are telling, see, if the present rise would be continue of the sea level, then you can easily understand the country like the Egypt, which is one of the largest army and one of the strongest state of the Middle East, would be a place where the civilization would not exist. This is the one of the oldest civilization of the world. Then the Maldives, what I have talked about. Then the Bangladesh, one of the largest Muslim populations in the neighboring countries of India. As it is, you can imagine within the 1 meter of the contour, the 6 million people would be living. And if the 16 crore people would migrate, where they would migrate? They would migrate into the India. They would not have any other place to migrate. If the Maldives would submerge, where they would migrate? They would migrate to the India. So they are telling us it would be a bigger problem for the world community. It's not only the threat to the food security, it's not only the threat to the biodiversity, it's not only threat to the human civilization, it would be a much larger threat for the world peace and for the world civilization. So they are talking about, you see, the environmental concern is one of the bigger challenge for each and every country. Right now the US is losing its own territory. In the future, maybe the India would face the another refugee problems, and what we witnessed in the 1971 when the more than 1 crore people would migrate from the Bangladesh just due to the human-made disaster by the Pakistan. So the other issue is called the loss of biodiversity. Through global warming, sea level rise and salt water spills into the freshwater area. As a result, some areas experience desertification in conjunction with other human activities, altering natural ecosystem. According to the International Union of Conservation of Nature, nearly 2,000 species of plants and animals are considered at high risk of extinctions. And they have given the 2 examples like the polar bears of the Arctic ice and the penguins in the Antarctica, then the robins in the migrating birds and rodent in the America Pica. They try to tell us, you see, maintaining the ecological balance, it is very important for all of us to keep the every species of the earth survive. And right now, the way the human activities are going on, most of the species are getting extinct, and they are telling, you see, the almost 20% are on the verge of extinctions, and if they extinct, then the ecological imbalance would take place, and number of coral reefs and other islands area would start submerging. So they are telling us, you see, you should not only think about yourself, because this species is very important not only for their own survival, but survival of human civilizations. And they said, see, what kind of efficacy of the biodiversity, what kind of importance they are giving. See, they provide foods, they provide us fresh waters, they renew the raw materials for construction of the fuel, regulate climate and air quality, buffer against natural hazards like floods and storms, maintain soil fertility and pollinate crops. They are taking, you see, if there would be no ecological balance within the biodiversity system, then you would not get this kind of renewal capacity of the earth, where they provide you food, they renew the fresh waters, they provide you the raw materials for the construction of the fuel, then regulate climate and air quality, then buffer against the natural hazards like floods and the storms, and maintain soil fertility and pollinate crops. They are telling, so it's a very important. Then the other important issue is the shortage of water. It is another major concern, and the scientists are telling, the academia are telling, see, what we witnessed in the 19th century, there was a war between the world state on the name of the oil, but the 21st century would be witnessed that there will be a war on the name of the water. And it was not, it was predicted by the Vice President of the World Bank, and they said, they see, already 40% of the world populations have water shortage, and with rapidly rising population, demand increase all the time. Ismail Siglandin, Vice President of the World Bank in 1995, said, many of the wars of this century were about oil, but wars of the next century will be over water. The bank were reporting that 80 countries around the world were experiencing water shortage, which threatened their agricultural industry and health. 9 countries of the Middle East are already forced to import water to survive. Now see, the 4 things what we witnessed, that the 40% of the world populations are already in the shortage of the water. Then the World Bank Vice President predicted that the next century, what we witness, the current century, that the war would be on the issue of the water, and war is already going on the number of countries. Dispute is already going on with number of countries. Then the third, they said, the 9 countries of the Middle East are already importing the water from the different countries, and 80 countries in the 21st century are going to face this crisis of the water problem. So out of 210 countries, if the 80 countries would face the water problem, then you can easily understand what kind of problem we are going to face. And here we are going to give some example, like Djibouti, a tiny state at the mouth of the Red Sea, has the lowest reserve of renewable water supply per person in the world, just 5,000 gallons per person per year. Kuwait has 75 and Malta 85. Yes, you can easily imagine those who are just a coastal civilization like Djibouti, they are also facing a renewable water supply. They cannot have a safe drinking water. The Kuwait and the Malta have been already facing this kind of problems. The Great Britain, the America has also a bigger problem of the water supply, and what we see, the bottle crisis. Then the second point, what they say, that by 2025, World Bank predicts that there will be 34 countries which have dropped below the 1000 m means 2,20,000 gallons benchmark. By this time, Djibouti will have slumped to just 70-60 gallons of the renewable water supply. Kuwait will be down to 40 watt. The case of Nile River, and here the see how the dispute with on the water, like the Nile River, dispute with the 9 North African countries like Egypt, Sudan, Kenya, Rwanda, Burundi, Uganda, Tanzania, and the Zaire. Then probable conflict between Turkey, Iraq, and Syria over Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Then both Iraq and Syria dependent on the Euphrates for the survival, cutting the flow of river during Gulf War. The conflict over Zambezi River between Zambia, Zimbabwe, and the South Africa, Mexico, and America over Rio Grande. What we have been trying to understand, because see, just on the name of water, what we are understanding from the last, if you see whether it's the African continent, whether it's the American continent, whether it's the Middle East, whether it's the South Asia, whether it's the Southeast Asia, everywhere what we have been seeing that every countries are interdependent on each others, and if there will be a water crisis, it would affect to each and every country. It would take a bigger problem, like see when there was a surgical strike, when there was a cross-border terrorism issue between India and Pakistan, the Modi government was thinking to cut the to snap the treaty of the Indus treaty of the 1962. Then the America and the UN was thinking about to cut the water supply of the Euphrates of the Iraq at the time of the Gulf War. So right now the China is trying to divert the flow of the Brahmaputra. So these are the issues are basically concerning the whole the community. Then you have been seeing the Mekong and other countries. Then the threat to food security, the last point what we see, the higher temperatures, salt seepage into the groundwater, increase in the floods and droughts, drought in the farming, disastrous consequences of the food security. What we are seeing, if the sea level would rise, it would create more and more problem, the seepage, the groundwater seepage of the sea water, and it would create a larger problem for the agricultural land, and there would be less productions of the agriculture, and it would threaten to the food security of the human civilization. Because see, if you witness that, you see from the last 803 to 2018, the world population has been rising and rising. It would take 4 lakh years to reach a 1 billion population, but it took only 123 years to reach to 2 billion, and it would take only 33 years to reach 3 million, and after that, after 14, 13, 12 and 11 years, the populations had been jumping to the adding 1 more million, and now there is issue. You see, in 2050 or 2040, the world populations would be the 9 million, and if the 9 and 10 million, the world population would be the largest growth of the world population in the developing countries, and where there is a scarcity of the food, where there is a scarcity of the water, where there is a scarcity of the other resources, and if this present weather climatic change would take place, then there will be more scarcity. So they are talking about, you see, if the present trend would be continue, it would be a bigger problem for the world community. So as long as the world community would not collectively think about it, the problem would not get sorted out, and the human civilization would face a bigger and a much greater threat. So in the coming week of the World Environment Day, we all have to think about how to reduce and how to use of refrigerators, air conditions, and how to reverse the changing patterns of the temperatures, and how we will make